we want to take, instead of, the term that we use, and we're not exclusive to it, but the term that we use is sympathetic renovation, right? It's not trying to be completely restorative. It's not trying to go in a direction where the members who played there for, like maybe you've got a second generation member, right, who grew up literally on that golf course. They probably don't want to not recognize it when you're done.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you can take the things that they love about the place and embellish them, and take the things that they don't like about the place and say, we're going to transform these, and you won't remember what was there because you didn't like it to begin with, then that's a pretty fun place to be, right?
Welcome to The Backdrop, Untold Stories in Golf. I'm your host, Matt Considine, here with my co-host, the Professor. Professor, how are you? Good morning.
You're oddly chipper this morning. I sense a lot of energy coming from you. Where's that coming?
I'm feeling good. It was a good week from so many levels. Played a little golf, one of my favorite places I grew up at. Played with good people. Made some strides on the business front. My kids, I'll tell you this. Here, this is a tribute to you, Professor. Kevin does something that I always found very unusual. And it's, if people aren't listening to him, if we're in a group and he's talking and people aren't listening, he doesn't stop talking. He just talks quieter. He just lowers his voice. He gets kind of, and I thought about this with my kids because they stopped listening to me quite a while ago. And I just started talking quieter. And you know what? It worked. It worked. They looked at me and kind of go, what's he saying? And so I just wanted to give you a shout out with that strategy. It's I know you don't have kids, but it works. It works with all human beings, apparently.
You know, if Claire was actually a listener to this podcast, she'd be cracking up because she gives me the hardest time about me doing that. Just all the time. You also played paparazzi this week, too. I was getting pictures from you criticizing slow play, too many practice swings from someone on the course at the same time.
There's many. I know you're alluding to. There's many great men from my hometown of Akron, Ohio. One of them has recently taken up to the game of golf, and it's all the rage because he's playing all around town through the summer. But yeah, I got to get a game with LeBron and just explain to him that 2 practice swings are one too many. We gotta keep it moving. You gotta, just visualize, see that ball, out of your hand into the hoop. But he's getting there. He's got his swing is much improved, I will say. Much improved.
I would hope when you're playing that much golf and you're that athletic, your swing would get better.
That's right. That's right. And I don't know if he's reached the golf course architecture appreciation stage of his golf journey, but if he has, he will definitely enjoy today's episode. This one, Kevin, that actually adds to why I have a lot of energy this morning. Dave Zinkand is coming on the podcast today. Dave's been a name that I think you initially put on my radar way back when. He is an Ohio guy. So that always tugs at the heartstrings, but really prolific and a phenomenal designer that's worked all across the country and so many different regions. And I'm really excited to have Dave on the show.
Yeah, and shout out to our friend Jason Way, who was actually the one that connected me with Dave Zinkand. We spent a day down at Aiken Golf Club, and maybe we didn't play Aiken Golf Club. I forget we played Aiken that day. Definitely played Palmetto, I believe, that day. Yeah, one of those, I think, fitting to the backdrop, the Untold Stories of Golf. Not a lot of people maybe have heard his name, but then when you look at his portfolio, who he's worked with, the projects he's worked on, just his history of going to Cornell, participating in the Dreer Award, and traveling all the UK. Just one of those guys. He does a good job of staying under the radar. So we'll pull back the sheets a little bit for the public out there.
Yeah, I'll have a few questions about that radar because you're right. When you look at the work, working for Coore and Crenshaw and Bandon Trails, Bandon Preserve to WeKoPa, his own firm, Old Elm, Sharon, another great golf course here in Northeast Ohio, Knollwood, Bigfoot, Monterey Peninsula, Chessie, There's so many. A cool project in downtown Chicago, right where I used to live, that I got to know more about today. He's just one of those architects who's worked with other great ones, but has really made a name for himself. And I think serious golfers, know Dave, and it's gonna be fun. It's gonna be fun chatting with him today. Before we get there, what do you got for us, Professor? Any good teachings, pontifications you can bestow?
You got a favorite sea animal? Well, are you a Planet Earth guy? Like those shows, David Attenborough, just put them on in the background. Because I'm a huge, huge fan. I could just every Sunday morning put them on in the background, let them go for 5 hours as I do work, piddle around the house. Huge fan. You into that stuff?
I am. I really am. Yeah. I don't maybe get into the underwater ones as much. I like entomology because of New Club's logo. So I really have enjoyed. There's a good bee one out there on Disney, or I can't remember who does Disney's. But tell me more.
Yeah, so I'm a huge sea fan. I wanted to be an oceanographer as a kid. That dream that for the longest didn't pursue it.
Jacques Cousteau.
Yeah, I love Jacques Cousteau. Would watch consume anything on him as a kid. Well, anyways, the ocean's full of incredibly brilliant creatures. Probably the dolphin comes to mind immediately, the orca, killer whale. But the octopus is actually one of the smartest creatures in the sea. There's a famous story, I forget which, it's a chef/food critic. It's not Stanley Tucci. It's one of the other big ones that's on TV. He talks about, to the extent he won't eat octopus because he went to a place, met an octopus. It somehow remembered him when he came back a year later. It showed signs of actually remembering who he was. And I believe this is actually legitimate science that octopus do have incredible memories. So he won't eat them because of their intelligence. And they're fascinating creatures, even just beyond their intelligence. The fact of the day is they have 3 hearts and blue blood. Yeah, so not just one heart.
The blue
not just
blood
2 hearts,
part.
but 3 hearts.
How do they have 3 hearts?
Yeah, so 2 pump blood to the gills, and then 1 pumps it to the rest of the body, so their muscular structure and everything else. That main heart, the one that's pumping to the rest of the body, actually stops beating when the octopus swims. So that's why they move around really slow, because when they start swimming fast, that heart shuts down, and then it's incredibly taxing on the body. They run through their reserves really, really quickly. That's why they look so slow, typically, and they just really crawl along the ocean sea because they want to keep that heart pumping. But then the blue blood comes from, they use a copper base. It's hemocyanin, I think it's called. Whereas we're iron-based hemoglobin to carry oxygen. It's what carries their oxygen. It's a copper-based mechanism, and that's why they have blue blood. And that works much better in cold, low oxygen water. So
There you go.
fascinating
Well,
creatures.
my wife sporadically listens to this podcast, so she just listened to that intro. I love calamari. It's one of the few things she'll eat. If it's fried, that's out the window now. Now that you told us about the intelligence and the 3 hearts, she's not touching it for a long time. The Backdrop Podcast is in partnership with Titleist and their all-new GTS drivers. Professor, what do you know about MOI? What do you know about the moment of inertia?
I know it's about the most important thing to get a good dynamic ball launch that's at your optimal spot.
That's right. And they have the new split mass frame. I've been feeling, I'm a feel guy. I've been feeling something different with my new GTS, but I wasn't able to really kind of get down to it. Well, the split mass frame is the one that balances an ultra forward center of gravity for that maximum ball speed with an optimized MOI for stability. So that MOI you can play with their new back-ended, front-ended weighting system. I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole with my own tinkering, because we all know tinkering, you just got to commit. But if you are trying to dial in your stability, check out the all-new GTS drivers. With that weighting system, the opportunities are endless, the different options you have. Higher speeds, straighter, even off those off-center hits. Professor, let's get on the show. Dave Zinkand, well, welcome to the Backdrop.
Thanks. I appreciate it. Thank you, Matt. Thanks, Professor. Glad to be here. Excited to talk.
I've gotten a lot of my friends into golf course architecture, and so now they kind of know a little bit of what they're talking about, and they know the big names, the celebrity chefs. but I get excited to introduce them to people like yourself, who I've just become a big fan of a lot of your work. And I want to start with this question, though, because Professor in our intro mentioned under the radar, a term that can be used quite a bit. I think in the right circles, many circles, you are not, but you did spend just a long time doing serious work for Coore and Crenshaw, and the scorecard didn't say Dave Zinkand at the end of a project. So I'm curious, now that the decisions are landing on your desk and your name is the one members are going to attach to the outcome of their golf course, what changes in your head when you become that person who's in the front of the room?
Yeah. Well, I think to start, I would say it's easier to work for yourself than it is to take on the responsibility of fulfilling somebody else's expectations. Not that Bill or Ben, either of them, were difficult to work for. They were not, and I felt like they were very open to the process and what we would do in the field to make things come alive. Right? And the expectation that either of them had was nothing would ever look like what they expected it to look like when they came back to town, right? But it's the whole process of doing work on your own has evolved for me. We've become a bigger organization. We to work in. But I just really have enjoyed that chance to transition over, and I know that the time that was spent with Bill and Ben was really an opportunity for me to learn how to be an editor of my own work. And I think that's been almost as important as anything in the evolution of my career, is that chance to be able to say, I think I've got something here. Am I too in love with it? Does it need to change? Can I take a step back from it? You see a lot of work really trying to blow people away, and it's like not every hole and not every aspect of a golf hole can be that way and make you want to come back and play it again and again, right? You've got to have some drama, but you've also got to have some quiet. And it gives me a chance to try and work on strategy and playability, to be able to step back from my work and not always be in love with what I came up with, knowing that many a time, either Bill or Ben or myself eventually have looked at my work and said, yeah, you could do this. So that's been a big deal.
Yeah, I like the way you said about editing your own work. I wanted to follow up and double click on that, because the professor and I actually have kind of an editing relationship going on for a project that him and I are working on. And I noticed that when it's my own creation or something I said or wrote, I just change it. If I see something that's off, I just change it. But if it's something the professor said or wrote, I have to kind of phrase it a certain way of what I'm seeing, or I got to consider how he's going to interpret the cut or the. How does that play out in your world? Is it very similar with, if Bill Coore, you got to think about how you're going to present the thing you're looking to change, or for yourself, you're just like, I don't need to check this with anybody. I'm ripping this bunker out.
Yeah. Well, like now I come on site and I see something that's different than I expect. And you've got to have an open mind, just like Bill and Ben always did, to understand that there's some backstory that you might not know, right? And so, sometimes it's literal infrastructure that's causing a problem that you're responding to, or an engineering aspect, or sometimes it's something more fun where it's like, well, I tried to go this direction and damn it, that just doesn't work. And so that's how we ended up here, and isn't this cool? And you just hope that, when I was working for Bill and Ben, you just hope that that's the response. Well, that's cool. I didn't expect to see that. Whereas, if I'm working with my guys, they're hoping that I'm going to come into town and be open-minded. And I look at it and say, okay, well, are we elevating the product, or are we leaving something on the table? And if we're elevating things and it's not my idea, I'm pretty damn cool with it. Good artists copy, great artists steal, and I'm happy for somebody to help me look even better by contributing their work, just like I did for Bill and Ben.
I think that's such a critical approach anytime you're working with a team, right? There's nothing better you can do than give agency to those that are working underneath you to grow in their own way and, learn their own craft. It just helps them develop their own identity because eventually they're probably going to move on from you. Dave, you brought up strategy and playability. And I think these are two terms that just get thrown around in the golf course architecture world. And if you live within that world, there's kind of a shared understanding there. But if you're just on the fringe or trying to get interested in golf course architecture, you hear the words, but aren't quite sure what they mean. In your mind, when you think of strategy and playability around designing a golf course, what comes to the forefront? Help invite our listeners into what that means coming from the designer themselves.
Yeah, they're definitely intertwined. And actually, when I was on the Dreer Award in 97 and 98, it would have actually been April of 98. I was in Ireland and I was walking around Port Marnock, and I'd been doing this for 6 months at that point. I was halfway through my year over abroad, looking at all the great seaside and heathland courses. And this guy walks up to me. He says, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm looking at the design of the golf course." And it didn't take him long to come back and say, "I could sum up what you guys do in one word." He said, "Angles." And, I'm sitting there thinking, what the heck's this guy going to say? This will be interesting. Damn, he nailed it. He absolutely nailed it, right? Angles is exactly what we're always working on. And, and to a certain extent, you're trying to get those angles challenging enough to require the best players to work the hardest and open enough that the average or high handicapper can maneuver around. And so, some of it's making angles that like preferring, in my case, preferring contour over more substantial hazards like bunkers or water or things like that. Not to say that, of course, those don't often provide the line of charm or the dramatic feature of a golf hole, but then being able to take advantage of the run and roll and bounce of the ball because of the way the ground is contoured to provide more nuanced mechanics, to the way the game plays out so that the higher handicapper does have the ability to get around. They might not always love exactly how their ball responds, but they've got, generally got a way to recover if something goes wrong. And the guy who's trying to, the guy who's out there knowing that the people he's competing against are shooting for a birdie rather than a bogey has to look at those contours differently because he can't afford to be on the other side of them because that is the difference between a birdie and a par.
By the way, I know you were at Port Marnock. Are you sure that gentleman was an Irishman? Because brevity is not their strength. I have a lot of lineage there, and we talk way too. I've never heard an Irishman say, "I got one word." They usually
it took
they
him
might
a
say that, and then they'll
long
say,
time to get to that word.
"Okay, there you go."
He was definitely sure he knew what I did for a living, and he explained a lot about it. But when he came down to the word, he was right.
There you go. It was about delivery. Yeah, good. Just fact checking, making sure.
Yeah, you were dead on.
So, Dave, you brought up the Drew Award, and I'm very jealous of you. Could you tell us a little bit about that award? And I'm also to put you on the spot. Was there anything on that trip when you're reviewing all these golf courses? You brought the idea of angles and what it does for a great player versus, a casual player. Any hole that stood out to you on that trip said, "Wow, I got to remember that one for the rest of my life."
Wow. So, the trip was like I said, in the last century, right? So here I am, 28 years later. And so a lot of what I think about and remember from is very conceptual. And so I drew a lot of ideas off of it, and I can see a lot of golf holes from there in my mind. But ultimately, it was taking things like angles and kind of understanding them in a way that I could then go and apply them for Bill and Ben and eventually on my own. But yeah, I mean, like places like I would tend to go more towards entire golf courses than singular holes. Although there's singular holes like at Hoylake where you look at the out of bounds, on the inside of the hole and you say, that is everything to this golf hole. Like if you woke up not feeling ready to play and you trying to attack that golf hole, you're going to be in trouble, right? You're just going to lay out away from the out of bounds on the inside of the golf hole where those cops are. Cops being very small mounds that define an artificial out of bounds on the inside of this essentially dog leg golf hole. And, and if you aren't feeling up to it, you just play way out, set up for the angle that you've given yourself, right? But onto like broader golf courses, Rye on the southeast coast of England, the south coast of England has some pretty damn good golf that gets overlooked when people are headed to Scotland and Ireland. But Rye, and the fact that it takes a very simple set of dune ridges, they're geologically extraordinarily complex, but from a just geometrical standpoint are fairly simple once you kind of look at how they lay out. And it uses them in every imagined side of them, up to them, down from them. The seventh, it kind of plays from a ridge to sort of a high point on a more independent dune. So everything is just one thing to the next new across the 18 holes. And I think that's a lot of what you're trying to do when you're in my position is to figure out 18 ways to present the same cohesive product in all sorts of varied ways. Presswood, St. Andrews, those are great ones too that you could dissect in a big way, right?
Bringing up those links courses, it and combining it with just the angles discussion. I've always been curious about this, Dave. The professor and I share that same affinity, and it really was what opened our eyes, Kevin. I don't want to speak for you, but just being over there and playing that type of version of golf, you become much more appreciative of the strategic elements and angles of the courses, back home. But I always wondered about in your seat this balance when, clearly the turf, the sandy soils, the tight fairways of the southeast coast of England, for example, or even Bandon Trails and Preserve that you worked on, versus the courses you've done here in where I'm at, in Northeast Ohio. There's going to be softer conditions. There's going to be a wet June every once in a while. How do you think about your angles, the approach of each contour, let's say, when you have to consider, you don't building something, at Bandon or on the links land, you probably don't have to consider what it's going to be like when it's soft. But how much does that come into play for you when you're thinking about the regional differences and just like, this area could have some wetter, softer conditions. Yeah. How's my angle going to play?
And I think that's something you have to consider everywhere, even on the sandier sites, because you don't have the opportunity to control how they're going to be maintained. Now, I've had the luxury of working with a lot of great superintendents, including, some in Northeast Ohio, like David Wilmot there at Sharon. He keeps that place lean and firm in a way that is just fun and exciting, right? And maybe more so than I ever expected it would play. So, it's a real balancing act to set things up so that you get that bounce and you get that action, when the ball lands, and the ability for the golfer to have a reasonably predictable, opportunity to play a shot, right? Like sometimes you're not trying to give them predictability because they've put it in the wrong spot, but when you're telling somebody like this is a golf course where you can play a lot of running shots like we did there, then you better produce, right? And so, some of that is on a very practical standpoint is produced by providing good surface drainage and making sure that those areas, when you're trying to turn a ball or run a ball, you benefit generally from the fact that that's probably higher ground. And so you can take advantage of that and you can shed water in certain directions and try and keep the water away from the green. But you're also dealing with the fact that you're often actually draining water onto a green in some respect because of the fact that you're trying to turn a ball or even in a fairway where you're turning a giving a guy a chance to take advantage of an opportunity that might very well be paired up with with a hazard that is sort of their worst case scenario, right? So it's you yeah, you got to be pretty practical about how you look at the drainage side of things to be able to make sure that you're setting people up for success who are going to take care of the golf course and allowing them to elevate it and sort of know how to pull back the reins on the way the course is presented when they need to, if you're in a drought or something like that.
If you brought up, superintendents, how do you, as a designer, look at that relationship with the future superintendent upkeep of a course as you're going about designing it and thinking about what's going to be laid out on that piece of property?
Yeah. Well, first of all, you have to have their buy-in, right? Like the guy who's going to take care of the place needs to love what you're doing, and so those relationships are some of the most fun that we get to have because most of the time, like the superintendent is a real gamer. They're on it and they're
Yeah.
ready and they're excited. They're more excited than probably anybody at the club to be able to take on the work. They know it's going to be, maybe a year, 2, 3, 4, depending on how you're handling the work. If it's a renovation, they might take on a heck of a lot more maintain an existing golf course, but they're very excited about the opportunity, and it's an opportunity for them and their career as well. So being able to work with them and develop a relationship, but also a platform that they're excited about is great. And I always tell clients, because when you start talking with clients, whether it be members or staff or specifically superintendents, quite often they're concerned about telling you too much about their opinions, with the fear of kind of biasing you towards or away from certain things. And while there is certainly some expectation on our part that like maybe we won't be exposed to certain things like concepts that other people have come up with or matters that have been considered internally right up front, we would say, like, give us time to ponder these things and then we'll come back to you, and then show us some other things that you've pondered yourselves and whatnot, and then we can come to terms with all that. But we're really trying to actually learn about what they want as a way to differentiate the work from what we did somewhere else.
Hmm.
So, from one client to the next, hearing that somebody wants to be, they want to look at things differently. Actually, we just let that play into differentiating our results. So that's really actually fun, to be able to come strike that balance between maybe our preconceived notions, their preconceived notions, and then turning that into the eventual results.
There's a aesthetic, Dave, that I've played a few of the in your body of work, the private clubs that will, after you were done, it had a bit more of the rugged bunkering, the native areas, the naturalized edges, and I just love it. And I'm sure not all members do. A lot of those places probably prior had that more 90s motif and a lot of green, right? And I just aesthetically, I just love a contrast. And I know probably because of places like Bandon and more overseas travel, this is a trend that has probably gotten more favor. But I want to ask this from a standpoint of maintenance and your relationships with the superintendents and those maintenance crews. What's the general response when the direction is headed that way? When we want to present it is a bit more naturalized, some of those native areas, some of those, more rugged bunkering. Is that mostly well received in your opinion, or do you get a lot of pushback on that from the maintenance crews?
Yeah, it's a combination of things, right? Because on the one hand, you can look at a naturalized bunker. In other words, a bunker where you're not maintaining a crisp, cut edge on the lip or, very well manicured turf on the face and, up on the mounding around it. And you can say, okay, well, the superintendent realizes that in some respects takes some maintenance off of their sort of routine maintenance. expectations, and it delays, or it spreads out the amount of time that they actually have to spend on those specific aspects. Like most of our bunker edges, they only need periodic to make sure that some of the turf growth hasn't kind of gotten into a playability or an aesthetic or a maintenance, headache that that just is not conducive to fun play. So from that standpoint, I think superintendents are really good at realizing, hey, this is a way for me to focus more energy on other priorities and pull back on those specific things like bunker edging, which was, when we were all growing up, it was like that was the expectation. Why isn't somebody out there edging these bunkers today? Like, yikes, lucky us, right? So, and then the superintendents are pretty well educated, even the ones that, because they spend a lot of time looking at other golf courses and talking with each other and learning, and they generally have an understanding that what we're going to do in those out of play areas, quote unquote, are going to contribute to that same effort, right? Pulling back on the need for maintenance in those areas so that they can focus more energy down the line of play, tees, fairway, and greens. And yet they also likely understand that those first few years after we do that work are going to be, because then they're going to be bringing those areas to maturity. And that's a real tough ask. It's a lot of work, and it's not what their maintenance crews are typically, that's not where they've focused their learning and capabilities. And so it's a real balance to bring those areas to maturity. And we're always trying to take the truly out of play areas and make them as nat and native as is truly possible. In other words, true native plants on those outskirts that, again, work towards our differentiating the product. And then as you transition back into the golf hole, finding ways to limit the disruption of play with those lines, and using things like low growing fescues that have short seed heads but look fantastic, and give that look that can translate out into the broader surrounds and feed that feeling of rugged naturalism. Because we believe that there's one of the aspects that actually two of the aspects of what draw people to the game are the fact that it's outdoors and the fact that it is, played over varied terrain. Every golf course is different. It is not a tennis or a basketball court.
Well said. Why I'm a firm believer the grounds of our game, ours should be the things we privilege so much as the game evolves. Dave, I asked you about strategy and playability. I want to now ask you restoration versus renovation. You have a huge portfolio where, you've done your own projects, but also a huge renovation, restoration project. And those terms get thrown around a whole lot. As a designer and someone that's been engaged in that work across a lot of projects, when you go into a restoration/renovation project, what does that look like? How do you approach it relative to that terminology distinction?
Well, first, we really look for transformative projects, mostly, where we feel like we're really going to, make the maximum difference to what the membership enjoys if it's renovation work. Really being able to say that when you walk out there, you can often recognize the golf course as what you've always known it, but that something has been brought to it that elevates the aura and the interest of the playing of those grounds, right? So that's one way of saying that we don't always look for restoration work. Sometimes really interesting restoration work finds us, and we say, ooh, yeah, like we would love to be a part of that because it is such an impressive original work that anything that we can do to bring it back to what it was and also enhance it based on the capabilities and the opportunities that exist today that the original designer couldn't take advantage of, that we're happy to go, right down that road. Times we're just looking at things and saying, okay, if there is a lot of history there and it was a worthwhile golf course, we want to take, instead of the term that we use, and we're not exclusive to it, but the term that we use is sympathetic renovation, right? It's not trying to be completely restorative. It's not trying to go in a direction where the members who played there for, like maybe you've got a second generation member, right, who grew up literally on that golf course. They probably don't want to not recognize it when you're done.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you can take the things that they love about the place and embellish them, and take the things that they don't like about the place and say, we're going to transform these, and you won't remember what was there because you didn't like it to begin with, then that's a pretty fun place to be, right? And it's a pretty good way to gain favor with people who are wary about you coming into town, because we definitely, we're just in that kind of line of work. We bring change, and everyone knows all the sayings that have come out of the fact that humans are they're not
Especially country club members.
Maybe.
as good as
This was one of the topics I was most interested in talking to you about, Dave, because I've, again, playing some of your body of work and playing a lot of others that have undergone fantastic restorations. When I'm in these conversations with whether with members or fortunate enough to actually talk to the architect or designer themselves, that there are these moments I have of you're just questioning certain things, certain concepts. And it always felt to me like a very simple answer was like, well, Ross's original plan was X, Y, Z, or Harry Colt wrote, plenty about that. But I'm kind of thinking like, well, I'm just saying what I just played. Like what are the members playing here on Wednesday, or so. I like your answer, and it's obvious you guys want to have transformative projects. I mean, the places you've been and what you've done, but I just sympathetic restoration is a really interesting concept. But do you have an example? I guess would be really cool. Of you found the history very useful, but there was a hole that just needed to be better for the people that are playing it every day.
Yeah. So if you look at the work that we did at Old Elm with Curtis James, the superintendent, Drew Rogers was involved there for a number of years early on. And then I worked with Kevin Marion, the GM. We all got together, and essentially the concept was, okay, this place was built by Donald Ross and designed by Harry Colt, screens, right? And then you look at what had been brought there over the years. There were a couple of major bunker renovations that had happened long before, many, many years ago. And they turned their back on a lot did in Harry Colt's absence. Like, not to forget the big aspect of this is that Harry Colt never saw the golf course after he designed it. And so Ross took a lot of liberty, like, wow, a lot of liberty. Like, if you look at the original drawings, you can say, okay, this is what Harry Colt intended and this is what Ross did. And they are not the same thing. And given Ross's body of work, especially where he was very involved, you can understand how he had strong opinions, and he was generally correct about a lot of good ways of handling things. And he didn't have that sounding board that, like, when I worked for Bill and Ben, that I would have. And you say, well, this is what you said to do. This is what I came up with. And then they maybe say, well, you remember how I said to do this? And let's give that another shot, right? He didn't have any sounding board from Colt. So then you go back and you say, okay, well, the greens at Old Elm are amazing. Many of them are like turtlebacks. They are not super friendly, but that gives so much of the interest and character to the golf course and the challenge. And then the bunkers are not even what Donald Ross built. And so we went back and we looked at what Harry Colt intended and worked with that concept, and then took the torn edges and the really dramatic faces that he had intended and built those for the first time. So that was actually kind of a fun way to be fairly restorative in a way that really had never even occurred, but was
Mm.
the original intention.
Man, that just makes me want to play that place even more. I remember when we played together, you brought up that place, and it's been on my mind, 8 years later, ever since. It just
It's a
seems
hell of a
like,
golf course.
yeah, it
Yeah.
just seems like such a special relationship that you had with the project there, working with the superintendent, and again, being sort of lock in step with them. Is that
Not to be a total homer, but also an Ohio native, Curtis. So just throwing that out there.
Yeah. Yeah. Curtis.
Our greatest export are the golf mines of Ohio, apparently.
He's done an amazing job there, and he's always fun to work with. Yeah.
There's so many other directions I wanted to go, Dave. I guess because we're in Chicago talking about Old Elm, I'm going to stick with the Saddle and Cycle Club. This is opening sometime this summer. A very quiet club. You do have a history of working with quiet clubs. Honestly, I think most of our listeners might not even know this place exists, but I used to live literally right around the block from it in Lakeview, which is just north of downtown and right off Lakeshore Drive. But I remember getting excited, whatever it was, year or two ago, when I saw your name attached to something just cool and different. And so, if you just would maybe take a second, talk about what the concept was. I think the yardage only extends to a few hundred yards, right? If I remember correctly, but it's a short course of short courses, and there's so much I love about it. Tell us how this project was for you, how it came to be, and what excites you the most about it.
Yeah. Well, the property that is actually contributed to golf is just about 3 acres. So, it's a very small footprint, and the club Saddle and Cycle is a social club. They're actually the oldest club in Chicago, and maybe I don't want to get too specific about it, but they've got an extraordinarily long history, and they had some golfing grounds that had evolved over the course of time, and sort of had been untended to in certain respects, kind of fallen by the wayside. And in some ways that was kind of understandable with the fact that the golf or that the membership has so many different interests, and being primarily a social club and having a heavy tennis presence and other things, but kind of being the backyard for a lot of people in downtown that don't have a backyard given where they live. It provides a lot of opportunity, and yet they have a lot of golfing members, and those folks wanted to take advantage of the chance for that backyard to include their ability to go out and either practice in a very serious manner, practice their short games, or to be able to take their kids out and play a few golf holes on a scale that kids can really enjoy and develop an interest in the game on. And as well as just go out with a wedge and compete against each other, right? Any and all of the above. And so we looked at the footprint that we had and just tried to maximize what you can gain out of it. And in doing so, there's a handful of greens out there that are oriented in a way where you could play it essentially in reverse, or you go out there and kind of play what we always called cross country golf, right, when we were kids, and just enjoy it in any facet, but also then the opportunity to incorporate a corner that offers a place for someone who wants to seriously work on their short game to kind of get lost and know that they've got the space to be able to work there, and as well as the ability to incorporate stations for camp, in the summer, for kids to be able to work through different stations and have kind of a driving range tee, a spot to be able to do bunker work from, a putting course that is pretty large and kind of rolls back towards the pool and the dining area, so that it's an inviting place for the non-golfer to kind of take a step out onto the putting green and actually kind of learn about the game a little bit and see some fun contours along the way. And then we took a nod from with the actual golf features. We took a nod from some of those great golf courses on the north side of Chicago. Not necessarily trying to mimic anything in particular, but there's a punch bowl green, and there's kind of a Redan opportunity, and there's these different these different fun features out there that take some history and try to present contours that allow somebody who is midweek and gearing up for a tournament at their home course, either west of town or north of town, and give them, gives them something that they can actually get some good practice on. So it's a place where you can use it in almost any capacity depending on the time of the week.
You've been involved in several of these unconventional golf projects, whether it be saddle and cycle. I think Chichester has the 12-hole course, Bandon Preserve, and these are obviously becoming more. They've become more and more popular over the last, I would say, decade. A two-part question: is this a trend you see continuing, and would you, as a designer, like to see it continue and continue to grow, giving people these alternative avenues in the golf and alternative turf experiences?
Yeah, for sure. We're a referral based business, to be certain. Like most, and that's that that goes into some of that. Oh well, there's these places that people don't hear a lot about that we work at, sometimes, and then as a result of kind of working with those places, and people continuing not hear about them, sometimes you don't hear our name as much as you might. But given that we are referral based and people understand that, probably one of my greatest strengths is to look at things in an unconventional, sort of out of the box manner. It kind of sets us up well to be able to take a piece of property and maximize what we can get out of it in a way that shuns convention and leans into the running game. Kind of takes what I learned over in Britain and Ireland and sort of polish things up or completely, create something new that is taking those concepts and bringing them to the ground in a new light. I think there's going to be more of it. I think there's going to be, based on what we're seeing and what I'm talking with other folks about what they're doing, there's certainly more in the hopper. And I'd like to see the idea that there's some more middle ground type projects that are true under 3-hour experiences that allow people to bridge, especially in larger communities where, maybe you have your potentially a super short opportunity to practice, and simply driving ranges as well that have short game areas, but also they've got their regulation size golf courses. Well, if you've got something that strikes a middle ground that allows somebody to take advantage of a smaller window, I think that's a great way to bring more people into the game in a practical way, because I think all three of us can probably think of a handful of times in the last month where we would have loved to have gotten out and played a 4-hour round. There's just no practical way to get there, get back, and play 18 holes in the meantime.
And I don't know about you guys, but I have always, as long as I can remember holding the golf club, found hitting chip shots in my backyard as one of the greatest forms of therapy. And you just
Yeah.
get outside for a little bit. I'll do it, as long as it's not raining. I'll even do it in the winter a little bit. But heck, it's a huge reason I ended up moving to Ohio. I was like, I need a yard. I just need a yard to do this again. When I was in Chicago, had multiple Chicago PD ask me, well, hey, what are you doing? Chipping, a little bit more than chipping. I think I had a 7-iron in my hand one time at Lincoln Park, but maybe that's my dream then, of becoming a member of the Saddle and Cycle Club. But I think those trends are just so good for the game. I mean, I think that might be a cliche for people to say, but there's another one too, and more specifically, because they're somewhat associated, I wanted to ask you about, Dave, and it's the reversible golf course. I believe even Saddle and Cycle was designed to be reversible. But there's one, Medina Country Club, where you transformed their practice facility into a 9-hole reversible golf course. And I was curious, same question that the professor asked, do you see that trend continuing to have steam? And would you like to see it? What are the merits of reversible, in your opinion, for a club, for the game that many of us may not understand off the hop?
Yeah. So yeah, Medina in Ohio, in Northeast Ohio, where we built the 9-hole par 31 reversible course. It's got 2 double greens. When you play it in one one of those double greens becomes a single green, so that in my design eye, I'm looking at it and saying, hey, you can truly pin every part of this green because we can play to the center and not worry about safety and those aspects on those days. And then it reverses and you play to the center of the other green when that green becomes a double green from the opposite direction. I'd like to think that there will be a continuation of reversible courses. I don't think it's ever going to be, some really large number. I do think that sort of the way that a place like Forest Dunes folds it into what they have as their second course, and a facility that is potentially going to have another golf course, I think that it allows them to kind of capitalize on what Mike Kaiser understood, which is, and maybe there was somebody who said this before it was associated with Kaiser and Bandon Dunes, but when you have one golf course, you have a golf course. When you have two golf courses, you have a destination, right? And all of a sudden, with Tom's work there on the loop at Forest Dunes, you have a place that you say, well, I've also got to play it from the opposite direction, and that's either one more day or at least one more round of golf that you're throwing into the trip. And from a consumer standpoint, if you're traveling to get somewhere, you want to be able to take advantage of, being there. And so they gain more variety and another feature that they can spend time on. And obviously from an operations standpoint, the ability to keep that consumer there is extraordinarily valuable. I love it. I thought it was so much fun when I first looked at that part of the property, because really, if you look at Medina Country Club, the 18-hole golf course is on ground that is perfect for 18 holes of regulation, 3s, 4s, and 5s. And the original 9-hole facility that they had, which was their red 9 at the time, was, essentially a short course on ground that was really perfect for shorter holes. It's got a little bit more quick roll, not necessarily big stuff, but it keeps moving. It runs, it turns, it rolls over pretty quickly over there on that east side of the property. And then they consumed a portion of that red 9 with a really, really academy that houses the Jim Wise Golf Academy that has like 150 kids out there in the summer. Like right now, there's probably all sorts of uniformed collared shirts out there in team colors, playing and having a great time. As a result of having a great teaching pro there who loves to work with kids, but is taking advantage of some of that ground that the red 9 was on. And so then we were left with a smaller portion. And so it fed even more into coming up with what developed to be a par 31. And I looked at it and said, it would at least be cool to take a look at the ability to reverse this. And so as I came up with layouts for it and routed golf holes on it, I just sort of said, okay, well, what if we try and tease this particular routing into something that is more of a reversal of another routing and they kind of started to come together in a way that seemed reasonable, but I was still really skeptical because you start on high ground, you go down through a floodplain, and then you come up back to high ground where on the other side of the property where the majority of the golf holes sit. And it just seemed like, if you're going to reverse golf holes, there's a certain constraint that the terrain puts on you but they timed out in a way, so to speak, that allowed us to either make transitions or make visibility work in a way that lets us go ahead and have those reversals. And from that point on, I was just all about it. Now, did I ever expect that was going to be the first thing that after the academy, that was going to be the first thing that they said, let's go ahead and do this? No. I thought it was going to be just like every other club that we work with that says, okay, let's get the 18 holes done, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about this neat idea that some of you like over here. But we're gonna put it on the back burner for now. But Bill Cosgrove does not think that way, and their owner, he just said, I love it. I love it. I love the idea of doing something that allows for our members to have a completely different experience than anywhere that they could get, than they could have anywhere else in the area, but also just being able to enjoy and feed into that blend of, family club experience that they've got in the relatively small town of Medina, but in a pretty good population area, right? So it provides that variety, and it provides what we've kind of, again, this is not a term that we've come up with. It's the ladder of learning in golf, where you've got to have something that's in between the putting green and the 18-hole golf course where, people can feel comfortable with. So they've got a place where I could go out there with my family, and any one of us can enjoy it and not feel intimidated. And so it was a lot of fun to build.
Paying attention to this stuff for almost a decade now, it didn't even occur to me how rare it is that you see the cool new thing first. I wasn't even aware of that with that project, but now that you say it, Dave, I think it really supports the idea of, transformative projects. And I'm living here. I'm a resident of this area, and I would tell you, people are talking about that in those circles of country club members, both their members excited about it, but others. And I think it's because that's something. That's a decision. That is so I kind of kudos to Mr. Cosgrove, their owner, and doing it. But that is so rare that you have that come first. Usually it is the big standard piece you want to take care of, the 18-hole regulation golf course, and then you see all this other stuff that may or may not follow. I think I've seen more stuff not follow that they had intentions to. But yeah, that's maybe a lesson out there. There's something in that to consider. What do we want to excite people about? Because truly, I mean, me, I was asking you in February. I need to get out there. I need to see that. That is just not something that is in this region.
Yeah. Well, and I think the idea of, well, to relate it with my experience over in Britain, over there, you have the club secretary, right, that rules the club and, essentially tells the members who are his or her boss, that this is how we're going to go about things, and this is how we're going to operate, and these are the decisions that we're going to make very often, and then there's a certain diplomacy that goes into it, but whereas over here there tends to be very much a committee-minded collective approach, and the trap that you can fall into, of course, is the idea that, well, we got enough people wanting to do the safe thing here, and we're gonna circle back when everything goes swimmingly, and then eventually we'll start talking about doing something more dramatic. Well, you can cut off your opportunities pretty quick when you're worried about doing the safe thing and impressing your members with how you couldn't have made a bad decision because you did the most conventional option available. And when you've got a guy like Cosgrove who's making his own decisions and saying, this is what I like, this is what I've heard, this is where we're going, it's a lot more exciting than you're restricted by.
Well, Dave, I'm a huge proponent of the unconventional approach. And I'm sure that is very hard, as you're alluding to there, for clubs to actually make that decision and trust you. And I'm also sure going and making a reversible course brings up some complex decisions that don't occur in a standard 18-hole course. Give us insights into that, something you need to think about when you're doing a reversible course that maybe is not on your mind when just laying out a standard 18, 9, or 12-hole golf course.
Yeah. Well, kind of going back to two of the concepts that I talked about before, which were the fact that the reversible at Medina plays through a floodplain. I call it a floodplain. I mean, it's a well-contained creek, and there's plenty of ground that's high and dry down there. But you get the sense of what I'm talking about. It's a common feature in that part of the country. You've got two big banks, and you got a big creek that meanders through it at the bottom, with plenty of width that, it's a fairway wide in terms of space down there, but then you've got high ground on either side. And the ability to maneuver through there was a big concern about whether that would even allow for reversible golf. And one of the things that sort of helped to make that happen was incorporating those double greens. We've got a double green kind of up on the high end near the start of the golf course that essentially forms the beginning and end of the layout. And then challenging surface that you can start out or return on depending on the reversal of the layout. So in some ways, we use those double greens to help us navigate that problem of getting down and up and out of floodplain. We also use some creative earthwork to be able to make it more playable than it ever was as the course that was originally there had been. They had a pretty severe approach to a previous green, and in doing what we did, we had a significant cut that allowed us to make it feel even more natural, honestly, than what it did previously, but help get people up and out of there with visibility, because a lot of what we're doing is creating visible excitement, right? I mean, the drama of what you think you can and cannot do is much of what golf is.
That's well said. One last reversible question for you, because I am fascinated by this, and I've enjoyed my own study of the courses that were reversible. Obviously, the old course being the most notable, and they now the Links Trust leans into that with, I think, a couple times a year they open up the ballot for the ability to play it as it was intended. The other way, both ways. And you being such a student, Dave, of so many great courses, I'm curious. I'm going to take the old course off the list. What is the greatest reversible course you've ever seen that isn't the old course? And it can be, maybe it's played as reversible today, or maybe it hasn't been played reversible for many, many years. Which one sticks out in your mind?
I think Tom Doak did a great job with the Loop. It's a fascinating opportunity to play. It plays a little harder in one direction than the other, which you would kind of expect and hope. I think some people maybe think that's a flaw, just because I'll hear people say, well, we played it in this direction or we played it in that direction, and it either beat them up or it was a little easier than they expected. And it's like, all right. Same piece of land that we probably want to lean into variety once again, right? So to me, that's an attribute of what he did, and the fact that it plays firm and fast on that lean sandy ground with fine fescues is just divine. And so I've played it a number of times in both directions, and I think he obviously has done all right for himself and showed off some pretty darn good work there, and I like the fact that it allows us to to be able to venture in that direction and have people understand that it is an opportunity that's available. And that helped, I think I could have sold the reversible to Cosgrove without that, but it sure helps broadly to get acceptance of what we did there.
Yeah. And I would concur on the Loop. I actually use it as it's fairly high praise. I think it plays more like a links course than maybe anywhere I've played in the U.S. And that's a tribute to their superintendent too, Falconer, who's fantastic. But I have don't know what the right word is. Maybe converted some family members to the merits of the ground game and the style of play there, and frankly, just the novelty of it being reversible is what kind of brought them in, and then they actually started to enjoy running the ball up a little bit and enjoy putting the 60-degree away and things of that nature. It's just a different, really opens your mind to options, which is so cool to see.
Yeah, the ball can get away from you, but mostly because you didn't prepare, and maybe next time you could learn from that and take a different approach. But I think it does a great job, that link style firm and fast running game style course does a great job of making for fewer impossible shots, where you just feel like if I was playing twice a week, every week, maybe I could hit this shot, but let's be honest, I might need to just lay back on this, right? So when you play those firm courses that achieve the running game, you get to be more aggressive, even though ironically you might be hitting less club and letting the ball roll.
Yeah. Well, Dave, I have one last question for you myself, and it's returning to your body of work. This could be a design question. This might be a business question. Because when reading through your bio and all the projects you've been on, I'm thinking about your own business and Dave Zinkand Design. And I have a business, New Club, where I operate within two very different regions, the Southeast and the Midwest for me. And then I start thinking about your business and the regions you've worked in and operated. You have Ohio, Rhode Island, the Arizona desert, you have the Oregon coast, the forests, California shoreline, the low country in South Carolina, and many other places in between. So downtown Chicago, which not many people can add to their resume. That's a lot of different regions, a lot of different places to operate. I'm curious, is there a habit that travels well everywhere in your business? And is there one that gets you into trouble if you bring that with you to the wrong region?
I think, pretty early on, when happy to have an arrangement between us where I could go out and do my own work, so long as I made sure to help them out when they were expecting me to contribute, and so vice versa, right? Like working with each other and making sure that we could make things work, and I responsibilities for them. Ben was quick to point out in some of the references my ability to work in, I think he called it, very varied locales, right? And he was also very complimentary of my ability to jump on a dozer and use the blade, as he refers to it. And I think again, just having the willingness to look at things from an open-minded perspective and hearing clients' agendas and their expectations, and bringing that to produce an unconventional, at least, you're working with a platform that needs to facilitate the game of golf, right? So there are going to be certain conventions that you need to be careful to adhere to, and yet trying to blend in maybe the unexpected is a good approach to keeping things fresh and maximizing what you get out of every project. And I think it's that you got to know. And that time that I worked for Bill and Ben, it was so crucial, along with the ability to just spend so much, that year abroad on the Dreer Award, and say, okay, what do we have here that we can get away with, but what should we also, kind of be cautious about, and make sure that, that we keep things in line enough, make sure that this operation can maintain it, and this operation knows that their membership is going to have fun on it. That's the big balance that you got to strike. And so I think if the Irishman was answering the question, he would have said balance.
Yeah. He would have said a lot of things first and then ended with a dramatic balance. No, that's great. I really wanted to ask you that question. I squeezed it in. We've taken more of your day than we promised. So we are going to let you go, Dave. But I did just want to thank you for being with us. I'm very jealous of my co-host here that he's already been able to play golf with you. I want to make that happen if we can, because I'm just such a fan of your work. After this podcast, I'm sure many of our listeners are going to be more curious as well. So thank you for being with us.
Thank you. I greatly appreciate it, Matt, Professor, both of you. Enjoyed it, and look forward to seeing you guys in the not too distant future.
And thank you to our loyal listeners for listening to the show. If you guys aren't yet a subscriber yet, you had a friend send you this, subscribe, hit that button. Why not? Listen to the professor and I banter for 10 minutes and then talk to really interesting people in the game of golf. We do it on a weekly, bi-weekly basis. If you're willing to like, rate, review, or send us a comment, that is super helpful to what we do here on the Bag Drop podcast and our mission to make this game as meaningful as possible for those that love. If you want to connect with our guest, Dave Zinkand, we'll have his info in the show notes, as well as the professor and I, as always. Reach out anytime with things you want me to bug the professor on. And thank you as well to our friends that are now helping us produce this podcast, Brad Malik, the team at New Club, others who have chipped in. The Backdrop and New Club Golf Society are in partnership with Titleist, the #1 ball in golf, and maybe these GTS. If they're not won in 2026, they're on their way. Check out the all-new GTS Metalwood at a fitter near you. You can find them over at Titleist.com. We'll catch you guys on the next one.